Wait, before going any further, this is part 5 of my ranking of the most commonly talked about analog horror series. If you don't want to be confused and want to understand the full context of what I'm talking about, I would highly recommend watching the other parts that are down in the description below. Okay, now let's begin. So when I went into making this ranking list, I really had about 4 of these in mind when covering them. Those of course being Vita Carnus, Monument Mythos, Dog Nightmares, and then finally Midwest Angelica. I know some of you guys have been wanting me to cover these series for quite a while now, and honestly I understand why. In a sea of boring clones, Midwest Angelica is a breath of fresh air in the ocean of mediocrity. And in all honesty, compared to something like the South Park analog horror, while it does borrow elements from other series, it really does it quite differently than a lot of the other series that came before it. And with its unique combination of borrowed elements and shockingly new concepts, Midwest Angelica separates itself from the pack by showing just how much storytelling and lore building matters within the analog horror subgenre and filmmaking as a whole. But to show just how much the storytelling of Midwest Angelica matters, let's do a brief overview of what exactly is going on here in the first place. The plot of Midwest Angelica is deceptively simple, but really shows the true horror of what makes cosmic horror just so frightening. However, before getting into this, I really should preface for you guys, major spoiler warning. If you haven't watched it yet, then go watch it. Seriously, form your own opinion first and then come back. Okay, now let's continue. Although still ongoing, Midwest Angelica follows an alien monster that crash lands on Earth after orbiting Jupiter that is given the nickname of AZ-001 or the Starkill. Upon arriving on Earth, it goes on a killing spree at a nearby farm, that being of the Joneses, where we see an entire group of people get wiped out and then a nearby scientist who tries to burn the infestation literally melt before our very eyes. We then see that instead of outright killing the people it comes into contact with, it instead assimilates them, taking control over every single cell within the organism and then twisting and contorting them into a horrific amalgamation that doesn't resemble anything like they used to. We then see Dr. Evans, who didn't even touch the Starkill but was just around it, get infected and turn into a horrific monster that doesn't resemble anything close to a human being whatsoever. And during the transition period where the cells begin to morph and assimilate, we see Dr. Evans poison the water supply, where his body begins to convulse violently before the Starkill finally completely takes over. This ends up killing and assimilating the entire research base, which in turn causes the mass to grow into a nearby town, taking over a nearby church and killing dozens. And in a secret experiment, we find out that Dr. Robert Spencer has actually been working with Starkill cells through the US government in order to try and make some sort of super soldier. And of course, to the surprise of absolutely no one, this goes horribly wrong, causing another outbreak and many failed experiments where hundreds of people die. In one last vain attempt to try and save the project, Robert injects himself with the Starkill genes, turning himself into a horrific monster who quickly goes and murders his entire base. The Starkill then completely covers the entire base, making it all a part of the mass, leaving no trace of it within seconds. This then leads the US government to then firebomb the base and nearby town in a vain attempt to take out the monster before it's too late. However, this of course doesn't work, and the Starkill still manages to get out. Most likely from the Spore Monster variant infecting someone else, as it then explains to us that it was all in vain, as the Starkill has already gone outside of the borders that the US government had given them, which leads Dr. Churchill to make a new task force with Home in order to try and kill the Starkill once and for all. But we then see all the forms and variants that the Starkill can come in, and the weird ritualistic aspect of it as well. But with all that being said, let's get into the actual review portion. Okay, before getting into this section, make sure if you like this video to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on Midwest Angelica down below. Okay, now let's continue. So for the most part, I think the series is honestly exceptional. It's a solid idea, although it has been done before, which is that of a monster crashing down on Earth and then assimilated in a nearby town or government research base. We've seen this plot before in things like The Thing and The Blob, however this series takes a somewhat different approach with its storytelling. It instead details the government's ways of trying to take down this horrible virus and all the containment measures that they do before trying to proceed and exterminate it. Because of this, Midwest Angelica does an excellent job at blending a realistic portrayal of a government struggling to contain an epidemic with a classic monster trope. Just like a lot of great cosmic horror, I think Midwest Angelica does a great job of trying to show rather than tell us what's going on, which is something that a lot of analog horror series seem to suffer from greatly. Unlike a lot of the other ones that I've covered, I actually feel like Midwest Angelica makes the most sense in the format that's in. It's not just white text with a black screen, it's instead trying to show an actual story. And honestly, I really cannot say I was bored while watching it. The series gave just enough information to keep it interesting while also making sure that the series keeps moving at a sustainable pace. Most episodes do not feel like an info dump, which is good, as it usually is a nice mix of information with some new event happening within the story. One of my favorite examples has got to be the first episode, Home, due to it having just one of the best blends of horror with storytelling within the entire series. This is because we see just how it starts with the monster crash landing and slowly infesting the nearby area while also introducing the main company that is trying to stop it. It also shows just how violent of a threat the monster is, as while trying to burn down the Star Kill, the soldier begins to rapidly melt and transform into a spider-type monster inside of his helmet. It's an excellent start, and the series only seems to get better from there. While a lot of the other series seem to be trying to replicate the feelings and aesthetics of things like Local 58, Midwest Angelica seems to be borrowing a lot more from 80s horror and cosmic horror. Hell, I can't even talk about its influence without talking about two very specific words, and promise not to laugh, but the Bible and then Evangelion. I'm sorry. I never thought I would have to mention the Bible and Evangelion in the same sentence. But the story takes elements from biblical scripture, with the aliens being almost a representation of the devil itself, as the people who are assimilated seem to be almost worshipping the monster. It's another demons coming to the real world type story, but it combines it with the 80s and even 50s style sci-fi horror trope of a mysterious alien monster landing on the earth and causing chaos within a small town. It also brings back Roman symbolism, as the creature that Roberts becomes is named Nero, the first apostle, the same name as the Roman leader who led the collapse of Rome, as well as being referred to as an apostle, someone who in Christianity are the disciples of Jesus. And that added layer of symbolism really makes this series stand out, as there are tons more going on behind the surface layer than at first glance, which is something I had been begging for from an analog horror series for weeks now. And honestly, this series is a breath of fresh air because of that, as it's not just another Local 58 or Mandela catalog ripoff, which has been something that has been driving me crazy as of recently. There's no stretched out faces, no mimics. Instead, the dread from the series comes from the unstoppable nature of the monster in the first place. This monster is an eldritch horror to an extreme degree, taking notes from films like The Thing, where the monster doesn't seem to have any true form, rather it's a collection of entities that is able to assimilate anything around it as fast as possible. Its only mission is to spread, and the unstoppable nature of it is what makes it truly scary, and the fact that it, even just being around it is able to get you assimilated, is what makes this idea as unbeatable as it is, despite a couple of issues with it, which I will get to later. So the dread from the series comes from the fact that the government is facing something just so unstoppable. It's an immovable object. Even after firebombing it and burning it with a flamethrower, it's still able to spread. But that's also not to say that this series is perfect. I still have a few problems with it, and let's get into those. While the series issues aren't as bad as a lot of the other ones that I've covered on this ranking, I still think there are some issues that keep it from being as good as it could be. First off, there's the second act. While I think the first act did a good job of being a good isolated story, I think the grand finale of the base being firebombed could have been a good conclusion to the series, but I feel like we've gotten to the point of the plot getting somewhat convoluted. That's not to say I dislike the second half. I actually quite enjoyed it. I just think compared to the first half, the second half has been somewhat lackluster in comparison. That's because I feel like the lore was getting somewhat too complicated for the concept by itself. While the monster worked when we didn't really know anything about it, I feel like it's becoming a little bit too explainable within the second half, as I feel like what made it work in the first half was just so little that we knew about it. Another thing that I think holds it back from being the best possible form that it could be is some of the effects. This is only a minor complaint, as I think the vast majority of them work just fine and don't really mess up the story for me in any way, and it wouldn't bother most people, but some of them look somewhat corny, with, for example, the design of the altar having people stuck to the outside while it is cool in concept and in drawings, but in the actual short, it just looks like T-posing model stuck into the tower. Once again, this is a very minor issue, and the majority of the effects are great, just some do stick out, especially when compared to the hyper-realistic storytelling approach the story is going for. It might have looked a little bit better if they went for a more stylized approach, but the final product I still think honestly works in my opinion. But that's it for the issues. Now let's get to my final ranking of it. When looking at the series, I can really only think one thing, which is that if more series were like this, then we would be in for a good time. Everything about this series seems to work within the format. Even the small issues I had with it were so minuscule in the grand scheme of things that I really cannot lower my score because of it. From the storytelling to the creature design to the presentation, it really doesn't get much better than this. So for my final score, I really cannot give it anything lower than an S tier. It just fits the mold of that section so well because even though it has issues, I won't let that be the enemy of great. This is a great series and would highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. And with all that being said, if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe and comment your thoughts down below. Do you agree or disagree? And that's all for this week, and I'll see you all next week.